5 ways to make money with your podcast. After this. Welcome back to my channel. I'm Kev Laramie, podcaster extraordinaire. Here are the 5 easiest ways to make money with your podcast, to start generating some revenue. It's what we call monetizing. There's multiple ways to do it, of course, depending on the amount of listeners you have and their engagement in your show, in your product, and their passion towards what you create. The results may vary. You can have enough to make a living out of your podcasting, or you can maybe sometimes make enough to pay your internet bill every month. Number 1. Now this one is a long-term one. It's called dynamic ad insertion, and there's multiple ways to add these advertisements, these commercials in your shows, and in the long term it could be worth it, and there's a good ways to track it. So this all starts by how you actually publish your podcast. I personally would recommend Spreaker. There's Buzzsprout, Libsyn, Podbean. There's multiple third-party podcast host companies, applications like Anchor also that could be useful for this. Once you're set up, you can be a paying customer and you have an amount of hosting capacity every month. And with that, sometimes you have the monetizing aspect to your membership with the podcast application company. When you host your podcast with Spreaker, example, that's the one I'm using. There's multiple levels, and once you come to a certain amount of professional level and you have a good following, companies will want to have you on their platform and work with you. They do have a cut of these dynamic ads. So the way it works, dynamic ad insertions, if you are with Spreaker, Libsyn, Podbean, and also Buzzsprout podcasting, work this way. So it's all different algorithm, but it gives you either a prefix, so a code that you would add in the publishing aspect of your podcast. When you add the URL, the insertion on your RSS feed, where you put where your podcast is hosting. So if you have it on a third party, if you host it yourself, you add that prefix exactly there. If you host it through Spreaker, then it's just easy. It automatically adds themselves, and you choose where to put these ads. So dynamic ad insertion will give you advertisement and predetermined area of your podcast, either pre-roll or mid-rolls or post-roll. So before the show, in the middle of the show, mid-roll, and post-show. Usually you can choose where the mid-rolls are, so it's a good fluid point of the conversation of your podcast. So these advertisements do not pay that much, but it's really easy on your part to set them up. There's not a lot of work, and usually 60% of the revenues go toward you and 40% goes to the company who gets the advertisers, creates the jingles or the advertisement, puts them in the right spot in the beginning or back, and make sure that they're high quality. We're talking about a CPM, which is a click per 1,000, if you're wondering. So if you have 1,000 downloads or 1,000 listens, it's what is used right now in the industry. So 1,000 listen, a CPM for dynamic ad insertions will turn around $2. So it's not talking about millions of dollars here if you're just starting as a podcaster. But if you have been podcasting for a long time without even realizing that you can make money with just your 4,000 or 5,000 downloads a week, you can make a living. That's enough to make a living. And that's a good way to maybe look at places like Spreaker and Buzzsprout and what they can do for you. Moving on to number 2, the second way for me to make money with my podcast is live reads. Commercials that you sell or that are representative for yourself sell, that you would add organically in the show for yourself, or that you would add in the show before or after, but you yourself add that in. it's a lot higher, the CPM, so your revenue will be a lot higher in these type of reads. You either have to be approached by the advertisers themselves, by a representative, which is usually the case. It's a marketing agency that will approach you once your show generates a good enough amount of traction, views, listens. But it's not just about views and listens. Sometimes it's where your show positions in charts. Your show might be new and it positioned well, and it triggers an advertiser, sees it, and then, well, he contacts you and you get into an agreement. Now, what is it? And if you're wondering, oh, someone approached me, and what is it? So again, we're going to think about click per thousand. The industry did take a hit because of COVID-19. As we're talking right now, click per thousand for live reads of your podcast if you do them yourselves. If they give you the ad and the script, it's a bit less. If you have to create the jingle and the music, you can charge a bit more. If you're starting out and your numbers are pretty low, I would go to $15 CPM. So $15 per 1,000 listens. And you can do an average of your listens of the past 4 weeks and suggest that level to your advertiser and see what they come. You can add a little 20% more as maybe a potential growth aspect. Don't overestimate that growth, because then you might not deliver on the amount of ad impressions. We'll get to that another day. What is an ad impression in the podcast industry? So a live read is where you have a higher CPM, $15 to $40, $50. Heck, if we're talking about podcasts like Joe Rogan, it could be into thousands of dollars. Because of the reach, because of what they can bring you, they can demand a high price. CPM is all about what you feel comfortable to for live reads. But this is my ballpark, 15 to 60. Never go over 60, because over that price, it's an agent that actually negotiates and with lawyers and a very more legal contract and binding fashion. So $50 is the maximum I would go for CPM for your show if you're well established. If you're giving a quote for a live read for your podcast. So my second way to make money with your podcast is live reads, advertisement commercials, time that you sold to an advertiser or directly to a company. And also, it's all about how you sell yourself. You might not be the biggest podcast. You might not have 1,000 listeners, whatever the case may be. You might not have a lot. But if you can sell yourself, and if you bring something to that customer of yours, that advertiser, that company that wants to hire you or to buy some time on your show, if they feel they have their money's worth, that's all that really matters. It's not just the numbers or how you can deliver or how much product of theirs you'll move. And sometimes that's something you'll hear when you have an advertiser or a live read for a company. Like sometimes it's a product they'll give a discount on, so they can actually track how many people use your discount code, and they can see your reach and the engagement. So your reach is how many people you convinced to go do something, and the engagement of these people will be how many people bought something with that discount code. So moving on to my third way to generate revenue with your podcast, to make money with your podcast. This one, it involves work. It involves giving a bit more, or it involves convincing your listeners to support you financially, directly to you. There's a couple of different platforms that can do that. I'm more familiar with Patreon, and I'll suggest Patreon because it's almost limitless what you could do in the back end of Patreon for video, live stream, articles, polls, or you can write things, you can do contests. There's a plethora of great ways to deliver extra content to your listener, to your subscriber through Patreon. And this way you can create different podcasts, artwork, many ways to have a creative outlet on Patreon can help give your listener, your subscriber a bit more, something that they will feel they want to give you some financial support for. And Patreon is a good platform. They can direct deposit to your bank account, to your PayPal. If you're in the States, Venmo, another aspect too. There's a bunch of possibilities of how you can get your money. It's very secure, and Patreon is trustworthy. They don't pay me to do this here, but I've been on Patreon for more than 3 years. Never had any bad experiences, only good experiences with Patreon over the last 3 years. And that's my third way to make money with your podcast. The fourth way for me to make money with my podcast, this one is not the most, but if you write a lot, if you direct people to your website, if you host your own podcasting platform on your website, and this is how your podcast is created with a feed burner or follow.it or similar third-party RSS creator, or regardless, if you just have a website also with your podcast, which I suggest, you should always have a podcasting website somewhere where you can send your listeners to get a browser version of your show to find it, because if they don't find their podcasting application or their favorite podcasting app, they know they can always find it in your website, and that's a comfort level for your listeners. So have a website, but in your website, if you have the monetizing aspect of your website enabled, then you can have ads. It could be WordPress ads, it could be AdSense, there's Google ads, there's a few different programs depending on how your website is set up. If it's Wix, Squarespace, WordPress, all different ones. If you have a paid plan, you have the opportunity already to probably monetize your website. And if you don't have a paid plan, but you have enough traffic, you generate enough traffic, you can have the monetization aspect of your website. Now, I suggest that one, especially if you write daily, if you write articles that create thousands of views on a daily basis. This one has to be on. You'll create maybe not a lot, but it'll be a constant revenue stream. $400, $500 a month is not a lot, but it's $400 and $500 every month with just ads on your website that you could have. People are used to seeing ads on websites now. So when they go on their browser and they look at your website, if there's a banner on top, if there's a widget on the side, if there's a left bottom menu with some advertisement, they're used to it. It's not so egregious, and it's not necessarily really aggressive. It's normal, it's par for the course. Look at every website. So that's a good way. If you have a good and high enough traffic to generate constant revenue, enough to pay bills, and start to make a big dent also in your revenue in a positive way. My last revenue generating method for your podcast before we say goodbye for today, make sure you subscribe. And by the way, if you missed it, if you want to increase the amount of listeners you have to make sure these revenue streams are worth it, just click right here or here, click here for my SEO podcasting tips. Now, my last way today to generate revenue is merchandising. It's like, oh yeah. There's ways to do it where you have to not invest $1, zero upfront cost for you as a content creator. Teespring is a good one that is free for you, and you can design your own merchandise. You can sell it. You can see example on the screen right now. This is my company, Workflow Clothing Company. So you can find the example and links in the description below. Teespring.com is a good way to create merchandise at a fair price. You get a decent cut, and you don't have to make it super expensive for your customers. And you can generate some revenues, and maybe even more revenues than you think. So for merchandising, it is of course a small percentage of your listeners that will translate into being customers. We're talking about like single digit percentage. So depending of the amount of listeners you have or the reach. So if you have a good reach, if you connect with people and they click your links and they trust you and they want to buy you, or if your merchandise looks great, then you might even have a better than 3-4% conversion rate from listeners to customers. But if you get that stream going, of course, that's the highest revenue one, is this one. So they're no particular order. But the ones that will truly make a dent and make you a professional podcaster are live reads and merchandising. The other three are more reliable and you can constantly have them, and because they're driven by your listeners and the amount of listeners you have. So if you get to a certain level and you're constant with it, you will always generate a minimum revenue. And then you add on top the live reads and you add on top good merchandising, and you got yourself a professional podcasting gig. Hope this helps. Before you leave, make sure you subscribe. Make sure you hit the like button if you learned something today. And as always, my name is Kev Laramé. Have a great podcast.